3 years ago, he ended our engagement with one final blow. "You'll never make it without me." I was 21, holding a suitcase I never got to use, staring at the man I once thought I'd marry. He left with a smirk, convinced my life depended on him. I stayed with nothing but those words seared into me like a scar. He moved on quickly, new job, new title, new arrogance. I heard whispers from old friends about how well he was doing, how confident he'd become. Each story burned, but I didn't respond. Instead, I built myself quietly. I took the pain, the shame, the betrayal, and I buried them beneath something stronger, discipline. When the time came, I didn't just rebuild, I inherited control. The company he bragged about working for had always had my family's stake hidden behind legal layers. At 24, I became majority shareholder. But I didn't announce it. I didn't take the office on the top floor. I entered as a silent observer. To them, I was another new hire. To him, I was a ghost from his past. The first day I saw him again, he didn't recognize me as anything more than what he left behind. He spotted me in the cafeteria. His suit was expensive now, his badge read CFO, and his ego filled the room. His eyes locked on me, and instead of hesitation, instead of guilt, he laughed. Well, he said loud enough for others to hear, "Look who decided to crawl in here. What's your title? Intern? Filing clerk? Coffee runner?" His colleagues chuckled, following his lead. My badge showed nothing impressive, and I wore no shield of authority to prove them wrong. I forced a smile, but my silence gave him confidence. He leaned closer, his tone dropping but sharp enough to pierce. "You should have married me when you had the chance. At least then, you'd matter in this building." I held his stare. No response. No defense. Just silence. Then I walked away. He thought he had crushed me again. He had no idea he was fueling something larger. The ridicule didn't stop. In meetings, whenever I raised an idea, he interrupted. "Let's keep the big picture with the people who understand business." The room laughed, following his lead, seeing me as nothing more than a background character. During one project update, I explained a solution for a supply delay. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Don't worry, she's still learning how staplers work." The team chuckled again. I kept my notes steady, my face expressionless. In hallways, he mocked me as if it were routine. Some people never change, still small, still irrelevant. He enjoyed humiliating me. He thrived on it. To him, I was the girl who once needed him. To me, he was a man so blind he couldn't see who held his future. What cut deeper than his words was the history behind them. I had written his first resumes, stayed awake editing his reports, sat in cheap apartments while he dreamed of the life he now flaunted. I had carried his ambition on my back. I had believed in him when he had nothing. And now, he mocked me with the confidence I once built for him. It wasn't just humiliation. It was betrayal sharpened into arrogance. One afternoon, he made a spectacle of it. A board assistant asked me for a document. As I handed it over, he spoke across the room. "Careful with that one, she still needs practice with basic tasks." The room laughed. My hands didn't shake, but my silence must have looked like weakness. He walked over, close enough so only I could hear. "You'll never be more than what I made you." His smile was smug. His confidence absolute. I wanted to answer. I wanted to break him with one sentence, one truth, that every paycheck he cashed came from my company. But I didn't. Because I knew the power of timing. And timing was everything. Nights were the hardest. Alone, I replayed his words, the sneers, the chuckles of coworkers following his lead. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I opened the drawer that held the truth. Inside were the documents that proved everything: ownership shares, majority votes, signatures binding the company to my name. I whispered to myself, not as reassurance but as a promise. Not today. Not yet. But soon. The very next morning, he tried again. I stepped into the lobby, and there he was, leaning against the reception desk with his coffee cup. He spotted me instantly. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, voice loud enough for the group of interns nearby. "3 years ago, you had nothing. And here you are, still nothing. I almost pity you." He expected me to flinch, to fold, to let those words define me like they once did. But this time, I looked straight into his eyes. I didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't smile. I let the silence stretch until his smirk faltered for just a moment. Then I walked past him without a word. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't pain. It was patience. And patience, in my hands, was the sharpest weapon of all. Because while he laughed in public, mocked in meetings, and whispered poison in private, he never understood one truth. The 24-year-old nobody he humiliated owned the company he served. And soon, he would learn that silence was not weakness. Weeks passed. Every encounter became a ritual. He assumed superiority. I wore invisibility like armor. I memorized his schedule, his routines, every boast and condescending glance. I didn't retaliate immediately. His own ignorance revealed the cracks in his empire. The company thrived under my unseen hand. Decisions I made quietly reshaped operations. Projects he claimed credit for delivered profits because I optimized workflows he never noticed. Vendors called me personally, unaware of my authority. Employees sought my counsel, mistaking my silence for humility. Every success I touched built leverage invisible to him. Then came the first subtle shock. He announced a board-level meeting, puffed up with self-importance, sure that his CFO genius would be recognized. He invited me under the pretense of a departmental update. As he strutted in, confident eyes scanning the audience, I felt only anticipation. I handed out reports, all innocuous at first glance, but they revealed inefficiencies, miscalculations, and liabilities his decisions created. The room murmured. He tried to interrupt, to correct, to dominate, but the numbers told a story he couldn't refute. "Interesting," I said softly. "I wonder how these projections align with last quarter's benchmarks. Shall we review?" The silence was palpable. Colleagues, who had once laughed at me, now shifted in their seats, sensing a tension they couldn't place. He turned pale, realizing something was wrong. "You're making a mistake," he whispered after the meeting, failing to conceal panic. "I don't think so," I said. "I just follow the rules." Rules he never cared to understand. Rules in my name. Rules that gave me control over budgets, hires, contracts, everything he thought he owned. The next weeks became a chessboard. I moved silently, strategically. Contracts were reviewed, projects redirected, key hires reassigned. Every corner of the company reflected my foresight, yet I remained background presence. Then came the day I revealed the first piece of truth. A company-wide town hall, packed with executives, managers, and staff. He strutted to the podium, cleared his throat, expecting applause. I entered behind him, badge low, clipboard in hand, calm and inevitable. "Before we begin," I said, voice cutting through the hall, "there's an update everyone should see." I clicked a presentation displaying ownership documents, voting rights, and strategic control, all under my name. Gasps rippled across the room. He froze. Colleagues whispered. He stammered, attempting denial, but the proof was undeniable. I held my gaze. "I've been the silent majority," I said. "Every decision, every milestone you've celebrated, you've been executing my directives. Unknowingly." His face shifted through disbelief, panic, rage. You can't. I can, I said. I did. While you laughed at the girl who once needed you, I became the woman who owns it all. The room erupted, not in mockery, not in laughter, but in recognition. People who had followed him now looked to me. His authority evaporated with every glance. I didn't fire him immediately. No spectacle. I let him watch as his reputation eroded. Contracts he oversaw were reassigned. Teams he belittled were led by those loyal to me. His credibility diminished while mine soared. Every time our eyes met, he saw it. The girl he humiliated had become the architect of his undoing. The 21-year-old with a suitcase had become the 24-year-old who owned everything he thought defined him. He had laughed, mocked, and tried to erase me. In the end, his arrogance paved the way for his humiliation, and my triumph. He stumbled through the next weeks. Meetings he once dominated now turned into mine. Every proposal he presented was quietly rerouted, every initiative he claimed was subtly undermined by my strategic interventions. He didn't know who was orchestrating it, only that his influence was shrinking, and his confidence faltering. Then came the moment he fully realized the scope of his defeat. A company-wide board review. He entered, polished and arrogant, expecting applause and validation. I stepped in behind him, calm, composed, carrying nothing more than the weight of ownership. Before we review, I said, voice clear, I want to ensure the board has the full context. I presented documents showing control of the company, key decisions signed under my authority, and a record of every critical move he'd executed unknowingly on my behalf. Gasps filled the room. He froze. The board stared, shocked. Colleagues whispered. His smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief and dread. He stammered. Words failed him. I own this company, I said simply. Everything you've done, every strategy you executed, was under my guidance. Your title doesn't matter. Your control was never yours. The room went silent. Every eye was on him, seeing not a CFO, but a man who had been blind, arrogant, and completely outmaneuvered. The final blow didn't require anger or shouting. I made one call. A contract he had been managing was reassigned. Key partnerships he had celebrated were now directed under my control. Teams he led were realigned with managers loyal to me. He watched everything unravel, powerless. Every advantage he thought he had was gone. His reputation, his authority, his carefully constructed ego, destroyed not by confrontation, but by silent, unrelenting strategy. And when our eyes met for the last time that day, he saw it. The woman he had humiliated, mocked, and underestimated had not only survived, she had conquered. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. The room, the contracts, the board, all of it, spoke for itself. He had laughed at a girl with a suitcase. Now, the 24-year-old who had quietly built power from pain owned everything he had thought defined him. And in that silence, he understood the truth. Patience is not weakness. Visibility is not control. And revenge, when calculated perfectly, is absolute. He had been a teacher of arrogance, and I had been a student of patience. The day came when his last thread of authority snapped. A company-wide meeting had been called, officially for strategy updates, unofficially for me to step out of the shadows. I entered with calm confidence, badge low, clipboard in hand, letting the murmurs ripple through the room. Everyone knew this was no ordinary update. He strutted to the podium first, trying to command attention. But the moment I stepped forward, the air shifted. Whispers turned into silence. The employees who had once laughed at me now watched intently, sensing the power that had been hidden for months. I have an announcement, I said, voice steady, carrying through the hall. Effective immediately, I am taking over as acting CEO. All strategic decisions, all corporate oversight, and all operational authority now report directly to me. The room froze. He tried to speak, to interrupt, to assert himself, but the board members and senior executives held up their hands, stopping him. His smirk, once a mask of arrogance, faltered into panic. "You can't," he started, voice shaking. "I can," I said calmly. And I did. "Every contract, every budget, every strategic move you thought you controlled, has been under my direction. You executed my plans without knowing it." His colleagues watched as the man who once humiliated me became irrelevant in real time. Projects he oversaw were reassigned. Teams he led were placed under my managers. Vendors, partners, and even investors now answered to me. He sank into his chair, defeated, eyes darting, realizing the totality of his loss. The CFO who had mocked, belittled, and laughed at me had no power left, not over the company, not over its people, not over me. I looked around the room, feeling the shift in energy. Respect replaced whispers. Recognition replaced laughter. The girl he thought was nothing had become the woman in command. And then, quietly, I addressed him, just him. "You thought you made me small. You thought your laughter, your mockery, your words could define me. But the only thing you made was a ghost from your past. And ghosts always haunt the living." He lowered his head. No words. No fight. Just the realization that every ounce of arrogance, every public humiliation, every sneer had led him here, to silence. I turned to the board and the room, asserting the authority that had always been mine. Strategies were discussed. Decisions were finalized. The company moved forward under my leadership. And as I walked past him one last time, I allowed the smallest, controlled smirk to touch my lips. Not out of malice, but as a final truth, I had survived his betrayal, endured his humiliation, and risen to power. He had taught me what arrogance could do. I had learned patience, strategy, and the absolute strength of silence. 3 years ago, I had held a suitcase and been told I would never make it without him. Today, I held the company, and he had nothing. The girl he mocked had become the woman who owned it all. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Revenge and Reveal brings you the most shocking stories of power, betrayal, and triumph.